You've heard of outlining, but have you heard of reverse outlining, the outline you create after you've written your first draft? This is a helpful document that can help you gain clarity on your manuscript and guide you in your editing journey. Hi, hello, welcome in. I'm Jerica, and I'm an editor, writer, and all-around content creator with a cat who is a monster. And today we're talking about the reverse outline. This technique is helpful for both fiction and nonfiction writing, and the way we're talking about it today is vaguely based off Al Purdue's technique for reverse outlining an academic paper. We'll talk very briefly about this setup, and then we'll adapt it to the needs of fiction and creative nonfiction, or rather a more narrative type of writing, rather than the persuasive or expository style of academic papers. So what is a reverse outline? While a regular outline is created generally before you start writing and is used as kind of a blueprint for your piece, a reverse outline is created afterwards and is used to break down what you've written back to its bare bones. It also ensures this new outline reflects what actually made it into the story. Even if you're an avid planner, rather than a pantser or discovery writer, it's quite possible that there was some wiggle room left in your outline that you took advantage of. We're also going to capture different information than you likely had in that outline because our use for it is different. We'll capture the essence of each scene and chapter and ultimately their purpose. By tracking character arcs, major events, and a timeline, revising the big picture pieces of your manuscript will be streamlined. Importantly, the reverse outlining technique is most helpful for earlier drafts where you are looking at those big picture pieces, and not so helpful for the final polishing of later drafts. So how do you go about actually making a reverse outline? If we take a look back at the Al Purdue resource, they suggest two major types of notes: main topic and argument advancement. So what does this look like in a narrative sense? I'd like to suggest main event and story advancement. Our main events will create a sort of timeline, while the story advancement will look at more of the purpose or lack thereof in each scene. There are more categories that you may want to add to this structure, but these are kind of the absolute basics. We'll consider some others in the information capture extras chapter, including the concept of genre-specific categories. But let's move on to the actual structure and organization of all of this information that we're going to capture. This is kind of up to you, as there are quite a few different ways to go about this, especially if we think about the fact that some of us are working digitally while others are doing it pen and paper style. Our resource suggests a right and left margin setup, but I think that may not quite work for our purposes, partially because of the amount of information we're capturing. We want to be brief like they suggest, but it's a little bit different. And also, if we are working digitally, it's a little harder to set up notes on the right and left margins. The three main ways that I see this being structured is with a table, a document with organized headings and bullet points, or some sort of hybrid, especially if you link them to each other. And of course, no matter the visual presentation, you can do this digitally or by hand. The important part is that your information is brief and easily scannable. Ideally, you want to be able to see your timeline at a quick glance so that you can look for plot holes, inaccuracies, other weird inconsistencies. You want to be sure you can tell each scene holds a clear purpose. And if you're so inclined, you'll want to be able to easily scan through things like motifs, clues, foreshadowing, things like that. But of course, there will be some playing around to see what works best for you. Let's start capturing that information. We're going to start by looking at those two main categories, your main events and your story advancement. Then we'll take a quick look at some other topics that may be of interest to you depending on your editing goals and the type of story that you're telling. The main events. This section should summarize the main events at their basic level. Brevity is key. Answer the questions: who is here? What are they doing? When and where are they doing it? Depending on how broken down you want your information, you may even want to set up separate sections for characters, setting, and action. And you'll want to decide if your story is complicated enough that you want a separate section for each of your subplots. Or perhaps if you're running multiple timelines or multiple POVs, you may want to set these up separately as well. Or perhaps you want to use color coding. We don't need to know what the most beautiful line you wrote was, what the characters are wearing, the exact words they said. We really just need the gist of what happened. Of course, if some of those things are super important, you may want to set up a section for motifs in what the characters are wearing, or certain foreshadowing, or if the wording is really specific and important. But I suggest you keep that separately from your main event. Story advancement. This section is where we really have to think about why this scene exists and if it should, because every scene should have a clear purpose. Now, I think there is some nuance to the idea of every scene needs to move the story forward, because things like adding backstory, characterization, and setting the tone or environment or atmosphere are important aspects of writing, especially longer pieces, like a novel. However, too many scenes where nothing happens should draw your attention, but if you can't figure out a scene's purpose, it either shouldn't be there or requires a big rework. And that's okay, that's what editing and revising is for. To help figure out the purpose, consider asking yourself, does this scene create conflict, introduce a character, reveal something new about the world, or add a new obstacle? And if you're using a spreadsheet, you could consider having a drop-down option to streamline this process. Some extra categories to consider. These extras tend to be pretty dependent on the style and genre of your story. Something with a lot of factions, political intrigue, or mystery will benefit from categories that track things like who's allied with who, tracking webs of lies, and maybe things that have been revealed to the reader but not to the characters, or to some characters and not others. But a cozy romance probably doesn't require that. But that doesn't mean that you don't want to track perhaps a motif. Maybe you're covertly using the Victorian language of flowers to drop hints throughout your story, and you want to track when those are used, what they mean, and then you can see how often they're being used, if it's overused, underused, if there's a lot in one section but not enough in another. A mystery may track clues and red herrings. An epic fantasy may need to track more information about locations and cultures. And a historical fiction may benefit from keeping track of real historical events alongside the stories. So consider what information you want to be focusing on during this revision and make sure you capture it. If you can get it all in one go, the easier the process will be. However, capturing too much information may become overwhelming, so you may want to keep this first reverse outline very simple and then continue using this technique as you focus on more specific parts of your story. This first reverse outline can focus on the plot, and then you can go back, make these revisions, and the next reverse outline that you create can focus on a different element that's more specific, because generally, as we edit, we get more and more specific with each pass. So we've talked about how to create it, what it visually looks like, what kind of information we're capturing, but how the heck do you use this thing? Your reverse outline is going to take away some of the overwhelm of looking at your full manuscript. You now have a clear timeline without all the beautiful fluff around it that makes it a novel. And so you can focus on the big picture without getting sidetracked by style and grammar. As you work through the sections and answer some of the following questions, take notes on the things that you think really need to change. But don't forget to take note on things that are really working too. This way you know what bits are absolutely necessary, which things you should probably get rid of, and what things are kind of out in the ether, ready to be played around with. They're probably necessary, but maybe not in this spot. Consider taking note of these things so that those scenes where you couldn't quite figure out what its purpose was, maybe you can work them in. This is going to sound crazy, but you're going to ignore your manuscript. That's right, put it away, no looking, no touching. we're editing the reverse outline, not the manuscript. So first, in the main event section, this is where we examine the timeline of things. And ultimately we're asking, does this order of events make sense? We're looking for plot holes, inconsistencies, loose ends, and pacing. Does the chronology make sense? If Johnny's arm is broken in scene 2 and out of cast in scene 5, but only a few days have passed, something needs to change. What's the pacing like? Do you have a scene where Ursula gets attacked, and then a scene where Kevin gets attacked, and then 10 scenes where nothing much of anything happens? You may have a pacing problem. Take a closer look and dive into the purposes of those scenes in between. Are there any missing pieces or questions left unanswered? If there's a gold watch collected with evidence, but it's never mentioned again, mystery readers are going to notice that. Are there contradictions in your story? Do we know that Julia went to the coffee shop 3 days ago, but in a conversation with Brad, she says it was over a week? Is that a purposeful lie? If not, that's an inconsistency. Let's move on to the story advancement section. Now we're looking at the purpose of every scene rather than the actual content of it. You're asking, is this scene necessary and does it serve a purpose? You'll see the advice that every scene needs to move the plot forward, but I think that is a little unhelpful, and we can look at more specific things that are a purpose of a scene. So the scene might be action and moving things forward. However, it may also be the introduction of an obstacle, a waiting scene where it's just building tension, a scene that builds the atmosphere, describes the surroundings. It could be introducing new characters or revealing more characterization. It could be world building, backstory. Not everything is about forward movement. Sometimes it's about stopping the movement and holding the movement or falling backwards a little bit. Additionally, this section will also help answer that pacing question that we talked about before. Does every scene have a purpose? Are there any scenes where you left this section blank? If you did, it's probably a good idea to just ditch it, but you can look a little closer and see if there's a way to spruce it up. How much did you fight yourself to find a purpose for this scene? And therefore, how real is that purpose? Did you have to think really hard about why this scene existed? Maybe you should rethink the scene. Is it something that you just really like or enjoyed writing and so you don't want to get rid of it? Does it need a little extra? Can you find something that you can add that creates purpose, especially if you have found that there's a hole in your plot somewhere? Can you repurpose the scene for that? And to return to the idea of pacing, are your purposes clumped together or well spread out? This idea is kind of, do you have a lot of backstory and exposition together and then one scene of that true action moving the plot forward? Do you have a lot of tension building before the next action happens? Sometimes you can have too much tension. Or perhaps you realize that you have an action, a tension, an action, and that wasn't enough breathing room between your actions. You can have too much action in a row as well. And for those extra pieces that we talked about, it's a little harder to talk broadly about how you want to go about taking your notes, what kind of questions you want to ask yourself. But because you chose these on your own, I feel that you have a better understanding of what you were looking for. So go ahead and ask yourself some questions about these, take some notes about changes that you want to make or things that absolutely have to stay. Now that you've had the chance to look at the story from its big pieces without getting distracted by your individual written words, you can return and start making changes. I do suggest waiting a few days after you've finished taking your notes so that everything can kind of sink in, and as I've said many a time, let your brain work in the background. because you may have some more ideas and realizations to how you can make some of those changes that you know you need to make but didn't have a solution right away. Now you can work through your notes scene by scene, making changes, flip-flop around in whatever direction you want. Maybe you know that changing one scene is going to have a big impact, and so you want to start there. Another thing that I highly recommend is rewriting over just revising. Now for some final thoughts, a little bit of a summary about everything we just talked about and how this reverse outline can help you. Firstly, not every reverse outline is going to look the same. Every writer and every story is different and has different needs. Over time, as you use this technique for different stories or for different drafts, you'll start to learn what information you need to capture for your process. Some will prefer a simple summary paragraph, while others will prefer fewer words over a more detailed table structure. And not to mention, if you are somebody who writes across genres, each genre is going to have different needs as well. You're not going to have all of the same categories for your romance as you will your mystery, as you will your horror. Knowing your editing goals going in can be super helpful. For instance, if you know that a specific relationship is really important to your story, you may want to do a focused reverse outline on that relationship. This may be more helpful for a second or third draft, but if you know that it's crucial to your story, you may want to just tack it on to this first draft reverse outline. Maybe you're writing a romance or a mother-daughter story or a sibling story, and that really relies on the examination of this relationship. The thing to walk away with here is that using a reverse outline can assist in the big picture editing of first drafts by giving you some space from the text itself. When we're editing the text, it's easy to get distracted by the prose when we actually want to be focusing on the narrative elements. I'm curious to know what extra information you're deciding to add to your reverse timeline, so let me know what your genre and that extra information is in the comments below. And if you're working on a short story, want a little extra guidance on these big picture elements, you know where to find me. If you found this video helpful and you don't want to miss other tips, tricks, and conversations, make sure you dingle the bell, hit the subscribe button, like this, you know that whole shebang. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, maybe learned a little something. I had a blast. Catch you next time. Bye. You've heard of outlining, but oh, why is my mic behind me? We'll capture the essence of each. My beautiful prince, you're very in the way. I think the heat just came on. It smells like burning. And not to mention, if you are somebody who writes across genders,